I never imagined that my greatest threat would come from my own family. There I was, at my grandmother's funeral, when I heard the seafood supplier whisper, "I'm sorry for your loss, Elena. And I'm also sorry about the restaurant. 3 months without payment is a long time." 3 months? I had signed a check for him just last week. The sympathetic looks around me weren't just for the loss of my grandmother, Sophia. They were for me, the fool who didn't realize she was being robbed while taking care of a dying woman. The funeral had barely ended when I ran into our head chef, Miguel, who had been with us for 15 years. "I don't know how to say this, Elena, but we haven't been paid in weeks. Marco said it was just a temporary cash flow issue." My heart pounded. What other secrets was my cousin hiding? "My name is Elena Martinez." 40 years ago, my grandmother opened Sabores de Casa in this small coastal town. For 4 decades, our secret sauce had drawn customers from 3 different states. Celebrities, politicians, tourists. Everyone wanted to taste that flavor only we knew how to make. The sauce my grandmother brought from the small village in Mexico where she was born. The secret locked away in an old safe behind a family portrait. That night, after everyone had left the wake, I went back to the restaurant. The lights were off, chairs stacked on tables, a silence that had never existed there before. The place had always been filled with laughter, conversations, the clinking of silverware and glasses. Now the only sound was my footsteps on the wooden floor my grandfather had installed with his own hands. I walked into the office and opened the drawers Marco always kept locked. Bank statements, promissory notes, forged checks with my signature. Loans I had never authorized, contracts I had never seen, agreements with companies I didn't even know existed. 2 million in debt. Our restaurant was sinking, and my cousin was the iceberg. The sound of the door alerted me. Marco walked in, the same confident smile as always, the smile that convinced my grandmother he had come back to help, not to destroy. "Looking for something, cousin?" he asked, leaning against the doorway as if he owned the place. "Why?" was all I could manage to say, clutching the papers that proved his betrayal. He stepped closer, taking the documents from my hands with the ease of someone picking up a fallen napkin. "Because this location is perfect, and soon, it's going to be all mine." "Grandma trusted you," I whispered, feeling tears that were no longer of grief, but of anger. "And you trusted me too," he replied, opening the old safe behind the portrait. Empty. "Even the secret recipe is already mine." At that moment, I understood that I had lost everything, or at least, that's what he thought. My first memory is the smell of garlic sizzling in olive oil. I was 4 years old when Grandma Sophia placed me on a little stool in the kitchen of Sabores de Casa and taught me how to recognize when an onion was perfectly caramelized. "Cooking is love, Elenita," she would say with her accent that never fully faded. "It's putting your heart on someone else's plate." The restaurant was our sanctuary, a stone building by the sea, with dark wooden tables and crisp white tablecloths. The exposed brick walls displayed black and white photos of our family, and the small village in Mexico where Grandma came from. It wasn't luxurious, but it was authentic. Sunlight streamed through the windows in the morning, and at night, candlelight illuminated the smiling faces of our customers. Marco and I grew up between those tables. We were inseparable as kids, polishing silverware, folding napkins, competing to see who could charm the customers the most. While I fell in love with the kitchen, Marco always had his eye on the cash register, counting the bills, fascinated by the money coming in. "This place could make so much more," he'd say, even at 12 years old. "We need to expand, build a chain." Grandma always laughed. "Food isn't about money, Niño. It's about feeding souls." When Marco turned 18, he left for college in California. "I'm going to conquer the world," he promised. "I'll come back rich and famous." I stayed. I grew up between those tables, first as the adorable granddaughter who earned extra tips, then as a waitress, and finally as a chef, working alongside my grandmother. Sabres de Casa wasn't just a restaurant. It was our family's history, served in generous portions, until everything changed a year ago. Grandma Sophia was diagnosed with advanced stage pancreatic cancer. Within weeks, I went from assistant, chef to manager, nurse, and head chef all at once. I woke up at 5 a.m. to prepare the sauces, rushed to the hospital, came back for lunch service, returned to the hospital, and still closed the restaurant at night. "This sauce doesn't taste the same," an old customer complained. He was right. Only Grandma knew the exact point, the perfect balance of each ingredient. She tried to teach me from her hospital bed, but it never quite came out the same. "You need help, Elena," said Rachel, my best friend and lawyer, watching me doze off over a cup of coffee. "You're going to make yourself sick. You can't run the restaurant and take care of your grandmother alone." That's when Marco reappeared. My cousin had left 10 years ago, saying our town was too small for his ambitions. He came back wearing an expensive suit, a gleaming Rolex, and stories of success in Los Angeles. He talked about startups, investments, important connections. Everything was vague but impressive to anyone who didn't ask too many questions. "Let me handle the management," he offered, sitting by Grandma Sophia's hospital bed. "You focus on the kitchen and taking care of her. We're family. We're in this together." Grandma squeezed my hand. Her fingers, once steady as she chopped vegetables with precision, were now as fragile as butterfly wings. "Familia es familia, Elenita. Trust your blood." I believed her. I signed a limited power of attorney so Marco could handle suppliers and banking matters. After all, he had studied business. He knew the world of finance better than I did. I just wanted to be with my grandmother, to capture her recipes, her stories, before it was too late. The first few weeks were a relief. I could finally breathe, focus on what mattered, maintaining the quality of our dishes and spending my grandmother's last moments by her side. Marco introduced computer systems, hired new staff, redesigned the menu. "See?" Marco grinned, showing me spreadsheets I barely understood. "We're optimizing processes, modernizing. Grandma built something amazing, but we need to bring it into the 21st century." I trusted him. That was my mistake. The first signs that something was wrong started subtly. I noticed that some of our longtime customers weren't coming in anymore. When I asked Marco, he just shrugged. "We're attracting a younger crowd now." The old folks always resist change. But it wasn't just that. The organic produce supplier that Grandma had built a relationship with for decades suddenly stopped delivering. When I called, his wife was direct. "Elena, we stopped delivering because you haven't paid in 2 months. Marco said you were switching suppliers." That night, I confronted my cousin. "We need to cut costs," he explained, typing on his laptop without even looking at me. "That farmer charges twice the market price. I found someone cheaper. But his vegetables are grown specifically for us. Grandma helped plan that garden." Marco finally looked at me, impatient. "Do you want to keep Grandma's traditions? Or do you want this place to survive? We can't run a restaurant like it's still 1980. There was logic in his argument. Maybe I was being too sentimental. Besides, Grandma was getting worse every day, and my nights were spent by her hospital bed. I didn't have the energy to argue about suppliers. Then, more signs appeared. Miguel, our assistant chef for 15 years, pulled me aside in the storage room. "Senora Elena, something's wrong. We're getting lower quality ingredients. The olive oil isn't imported anymore. The flour isn't the same." "Marco is cutting costs," I explained, though a knot started forming in my stomach. Miguel shook his head. "No es solo eso. The new employees are getting paid more than us, the old staff. And when we ask about the delayed paychecks, Marco says it was you who ordered the hold." That hit me like a punch. I would never give such an order. That night, as I locked up the restaurant, I noticed another change. Grandma's recipe book, which always sat on the kitchen shelf, was gone. "Marco, where's the recipe book?" "Oh, I put it in the safe," he answered vaguely, too valuable to leave out. It made sense, but why hadn't he asked me first? At the hospital, Grandma held my hand as she told me the story of the secret sauce once again. It was our tradition. During every visit, she would share a new detail about the recipe, making sure I never forgot. "The secret isn't in the ingredients, Elenita," she whispered. "It's in the timing, in the love, and in the safe behind the portrait." I nodded, thinking it was just the medication talking. The safe behind the family portrait was where we kept the written recipe, of course. But she always said the real secret was in the heart. That's when I got the call that changed everything. The bank wanted to discuss recent loans. "What loans?" "Ms. Martinez, your signature is on the documents. 3 loans totaling $600,000 in the last 4 months. There must be some mistake," I replied, feeling my blood turn cold. I never signed for any loans. The next morning, I arrived early at the restaurant to check the office files, but the door was locked. Marco reorganized everything. The new hostess, hired by my cousin, explained. "Only he has access now." And then the worst happened. Grandma Sophia passed away on a rainy Tuesday. Her last words were for me. "Take care of our legacy, mi niña. Remember the safe." The restaurant closed for 3 days of mourning. At the wake, I received condolences mixed with concern. The seafood supplier, the coffee machine technician, the cleaning company, they all mentioned late payments, outstanding bills. Marco was strangely absent for most of the funeral, always on the phone, whispering in corners. I was too consumed by grief to question it, until the bank manager discreetly approached me during the dinner after the funeral. "Ms. Martinez, I'm so sorry to bother you at such a difficult time, but we need to discuss the restaurant situation urgently. The mortgage is 3 months past due, and with the new loans..." "New loans?" "Yes, 2 more were approved last week. Your cousin presented your power of attorney and..." My world collapsed. As soon as the last guests left, I ran to the restaurant, determined to uncover the truth. That's when I walked into the office and saw it. Evidence of Marco's betrayal spread out across the desk. And there, in that devastating moment, I lost the last piece of my grandmother. The secret recipe that was our family's legacy. Why, Marco, why would you do this to your own family? My cousin adjusted his expensive blazer, casually organizing the documents as if they were just routine end-of-day reports. "Business isn't personal, Elena. This place has potential that you and Grandma never saw. Sabores de Casa. Please, the name says it all. Old-fashioned, homemade, limited. It's our tradition. It's what our customers love." Marco laughed, settling into the leather chair he had bought to replace Grandma's old wooden armchair. "Customers don't even know what they want until we offer them something better. I have an investor, Victor Reynolds. Ever heard of him?" I shook my head, feeling more nauseous by the second. Victor transforms traditional restaurants into modern concepts. He's done it in San Francisco, Chicago, Miami. The plan is simple. We run this place into the ground, buy it for pennies at a foreclosure auction, completely renovate it, and reopen as fusion, contemporary Latin cuisine. Every word was like a knife to my heart. I wasn't just losing the restaurant. I was watching our family history being rewritten. And me? And the employees who have worked here their whole lives? Marco shrugged. "You can be a chef somewhere else. As for the staff, well, business requires sacrifices." I grabbed one of the promissory notes, my supposed signature perfectly forged at the bottom. "This is a crime, Marco. Forgery, fraud." "Prove it," he challenged. "Your power of attorney gave me legal access to the documents. My word against yours. And guess what? I have friends in the local police department. Victor's brother is the sheriff." That's when I noticed the safe behind the family portrait, open and empty. The recipe. The famous secret sauce. Marco reached into the inner pocket of his blazer, pulling out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. The Martinez family treasure. Do you have any idea how much this is worth in the right hands? I lunged to grab it, but he was faster, tucking it away again. You don't understand modern business, Elena. We're in the era of franchises, brands, intellectual property. This recipe could become a supermarket product sold nationwide. It's not just a recipe, I shouted, tears finally escaping. It's Grandma's story, our family's story, the village in Mexico where she was born. Stories don't pay the bills, he replied coldly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with Victor. We're finalizing the details for when the bank forecloses on this place. Marco grabbed his expensive briefcase and walked to the door, pausing for a final remark. If you want, I can offer you a position at the new restaurant. Executive chef, no administrative responsibilities. You've always been talented in the kitchen, cousin, but terrible at business. I was left alone in the office, surrounded by the wreckage of my grandmother's dream. 40 years of history about to be erased with a single signature. That's when I noticed something in the family portrait behind the empty safe. In the photo, Grandma Sophia, young and proud at the restaurant's grand opening, was pointing at the brick wall with one hand, while the other rested on my child-sized shoulder. Her fingers formed an unusual gesture, one I had never noticed before. A code. A message. Grandma knew this day might come. Remember the safe, mi niña. Her last words echoed in my mind. I had lost everything, or at least that's what Marco thought. That night, after Marco left, I stared at the family portrait for hours. Grandma's gesture in the photo had to mean something. Her final days, her last words, everything pointed to a hidden message. Elena? Elena, are you there? Rachel, my lawyer and friend, appeared at the door. I had left several desperate messages on her voicemail. He destroyed everything, Rachel, I murmured, still looking at the picture. The restaurant is drowning in debt, $2 million, and he took the secret recipe. Rachel examined the documents, scattered across the table, her professional demeanor growing increasingly serious. This is fraud, Elena. Forgery. He expanded the power of attorney without your knowledge. We can sue him. And how long would that take? The bank will foreclose. In weeks. Who is this Victor guy, the investor? We searched on Rachel's laptop. Victor Reynolds appeared in dozens of articles. The restaurant butcher, one Chicago newspaper called him. His specialty was acquiring struggling traditional establishments, turning them into generic modern concepts, then selling them to big chains. He's done this dozens of times, Rachel said, showing me before and after photos. Family-owned restaurants transformed into sterile, impersonal spaces, just like so many others. That's when someone knocked on the back door. It was Daniel, the chef from a nearby restaurant and a longtime customer at Sabores de Casa. I came as soon as I heard, he explained, carrying a box of wine bottles. I figured we'd need this. Daniel had always admired our restaurant. Sometimes he would stop by just to talk food with Grandma Sophia, sharing techniques and discussing ingredients. What this Victor guy doesn't understand, Daniel said after hearing the full story, is that the value of Sabores de Casa isn't in the location. It's in the tradition, the recipes, your cooking, Elena. As we talked, my eyes kept returning to the family portrait. Grandma's gesture, those fingers positioned so strangely. Wait, I interrupted. Look at her hand in the picture. 3 fingers extended, her thumb bent at an unnatural angle. It looks like she's pointing 3 to the left, Rachel suggested. Or 3 bricks over, Daniel added. We looked at each other and ran to the brick wall behind the empty safe. I started counting, following the direction Grandma pointed to in the photo. 1, 2, 3. The brick looked just like the others, but when I pressed its side, it shifted. Behind it, a small hidden compartment. Grandma, you genius, I whispered, pulling out an aged envelope. Inside, there were 2 documents and a recipe sheet even older than the one Marco had stolen. "It's your grandmother's will," Rachel exclaimed, examining the first document. "Leaving the restaurant exclusively to you, with a specific clause prohibiting any sale or transfer to Marco." The second document was even more shocking, a letter written by Grandma, detailing how Marco had tried at 16 to alter her previous will. A letter addressed to the family lawyer, never sent, but kept as evidence. "Grandma always knew," I murmured, feeling a mix of sadness and admiration. She knew he'd come back to try again. And finally, the recipe. The true secret sauce recipe. "This isn't what's in the official recipe book," I realized as I read the ingredients. "This is different, more detailed." Daniel studied the yellowed paper with expert eyes. "Elena, this is the real secret. Whatever Marco stole must be an incomplete version. A decoy. Grandma knew he'd come after this," I concluded. "So she created a fake version to protect the original." For the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than pain and despair. A spark of hope. "Rachel," I asked, "with these documents, can we stop Marco?" My friend smiled, her expression that of a lawyer ready for battle. "Not only can we stop Marco, we can destroy him. We're going to need a flawless strategy," Rachel said, spreading the documents across the kitchen table of the restaurant. "Marco and Victor are already negotiating with the bank for the foreclosure auction. We don't have much time." 3 days after discovering the hidden compartment, our small resistance team was formed. Me, Rachel, Daniel, Miguel, and 2 veteran waiters who refused to abandon Sabores de Casa. "First part of the plan, legal action," Rachel explained. "With your grandmother's will and letter, we can file for an injunction preventing Marco from representing the restaurant or signing any documents. We're also suing him for fraud and forgery." "How long will that take?" I asked, anxious. "Normally, months. But I have a judge friend who can expedite the injunction this week. The problem is that won't solve the existing debts." Daniel, who had been deep in thought, finally spoke up. "What if we approach this from another angle? Elena, the real recipe we found, can you recreate it exactly?" I examined the document again. Grandma's notes were precise, but they included techniques she had never formally taught me. "It'll take a few tries, but yes." "Then we have our second battlefront," Daniel grinned, his eyes shining with excitement. "While Rachel handles the legal side, we launch a culinary offensive." The plan was bold. Instead of trying to reopen the restaurant immediately, we would start hosting exclusive dinners at the homes of loyal customers. Small, intimate events where I would prepare dishes using the true secret recipe. "We'll create buzz, anticipation," Daniel explained. "Make people remember why they loved Sabores de Casa so much." Miguel, our assistant chef, added, "Meanwhile, we document everything. We build a portfolio to present to potential investors." Rachel nodded. "We need capital to save the restaurant. If we can find investors who respect tradition, unlike Victor." The days that followed, our underground operation began. My small home kitchen turned into a culinary lab. I tested the secret recipe 5, 10, 15 times. Each attempt bringing me closer to the flavor I had grown up tasting. On the 16th attempt, when the aroma filled the kitchen, I knew I had done it. A single tear slipped down my cheek as I tasted the sauce. "Grandma," I whispered, "we did it." The first dinner was held at the mayor's house, a loyal customer for decades. 20 influential guests, all intrigued by the mysterious invitation to a one-of-a-kind culinary experience. When I served the main dish, drenched in the secret sauce, the room fell silent, followed by murmurs of approval that soon turned into delighted exclamations. "Elena, this is exactly how your grandmother made it," the mayor's wife exclaimed. "This flavor, it reminds me of when we first met, 30 years ago." By the end of the night, we already had requests for 10 more dinners and multiple loan offers to save the restaurant. Meanwhile, Rachel was working tirelessly in the courts. The injunction was granted. Marco was legally barred from representing Sabores de Casa or negotiating its sale. "He's furious," Rachel told me after a preliminary hearing. "He showed up with 2 expensive lawyers, probably paid for by Victor, but the judge didn't even want to hear it after seeing the evidence of forgery. Our strategy was working. Each private dinner generated more buzz, more offers of help, more attention from the local media. The revival of Sabores de Casa, the town's newspaper announced. The movement grew organically. Former customers shared memories online about special moments they had experienced at the restaurant. A support page on social media hit 10,000 followers in just a week. "We need the final blow," Daniel said after our 6th successful dinner. "Something that won't just save the restaurant but will take Marco and Victor out of the game for good." That's when the perfect opportunity arose. Victor Reynolds had scheduled a press conference to announce his plans for the future of the space currently occupied by the outdated Sabores de Casa. "Don't they know about the injunction?" I asked. "Rachel, they do, but they're ignoring it. Victor thinks he can pressure the bank into foreclosing anyway." Daniel grinned. That kind of grin he had when he came up with a brilliant idea. "Then we're going to show up at their press conference with a surprise no one is expecting." The press conference took place in the lobby of a luxury hotel. Victor Reynolds, imposing in his Italian suit, was presenting slides showcasing the visionary transformation planned for Sabores de Casa. Marco stood beside him, smiling, as if he already owned the new venture. "Fusion will be the new culinary landmark of this city," Victor declared to the gathered journalists. "We will maintain a touch of the original Latin cuisine, but with a contemporary approach, designed for a more refined audience." The presentation displayed digital renderings of the once cozy Sabores de Casa, now transformed into a minimalist, almost sterile space. The wooden tables replaced by glass, the brick walls covered in sleek white panels, the open kitchen converted into a molecular gastronomy laboratory. "Any questions?" Victor concluded, confident. I stood up from the back of the room. "Yes, I have a question. How do you plan to recreate the flavor that has brought customers here for 40 years without the original recipe?" A murmur spread through the room as I walked toward the front. Rachel followed, carrying a folder full of documents. Daniel was right behind her, pushing a cart covered with a white cloth. "Elena," Marco hissed, his smile freezing. "What are you doing here?" Victor remained composed, though his eyes flickered with irritation. "Miss Martinez, I understand your frustration, but this is how business works. Your restaurant failed. It's time to make way for the future." "My restaurant didn't fail," I replied calmly. "In fact, it's more alive than ever." Rachel handed out documents to the journalists. "Here is the court injunction preventing any negotiation involving Sabores de Casa. We also have evidence of fraud and forgery against Marco Martinez, who was never authorized to mortgage or sell the establishment." Victor turned to Marco, who was growing paler by the second. "You assured me this was taken care of." "And the stolen recipe?" I continued, pulling out the aged paper that Daniel handed me. "The one you have, Marco, is incomplete. Grandma always knew you'd come back to try and take the restaurant." The press went into a frenzy, cameras clicking, reporters scribbling furiously. "This is ridiculous." Victor tried to regain control. "I have signed contracts." The bank received a better offer," I interrupted, signaling for Daniel to remove the cloth from the cart. Beneath it, an improvised table with small plates for everyone present. The aroma of the secret sauce quickly filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "before you believe in promises of a refined future, I suggest you taste what made Sabores de Casa beloved for generations." The journalists didn't need a second invitation. As they took their first bites, their faces lit up with an expression I knew well, the same look I had seen in customers all my life. "This tastes exactly like my graduation night," a reporter exclaimed. "Remember our first date? a photographer asked his wife. Amidst the moment, an older man approached Victor. He whispered something in his ear, causing the businessman to visibly pale. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man announced, turning to the press, "I am Anthony Reynolds, Victor's brother and the majority owner of our investment group. I just tasted what would have been lost to our vision, and I've made a decision." Victor tried to protest, but Anthony silenced him with a gesture. "Reynolds Investments is withdrawing its offer for Sabores de Casa. Instead," he turned to me, "we would like to propose a partnership with Miss Martinez, an investment that preserves the essence of the restaurant, maintaining its vision and traditions intact." The chaos that followed was epic. Marco tried to flee, only to be intercepted by police officers waiting in the lobby. Victor stormed out in a rage, shoving journalists aside. And me? I stayed, serving another round of sauce, sharing stories about my grandmother with a growing circle of captivated listeners. 3 months later, Sabores de Casa reopened its doors, not as Fusion, but as Sophia's, a tribute to my grandmother. The wooden tables remained, as did the brick walls adorned with family photos. The kitchen received modern equipment, but the heart of the place, its traditions, its recipes, its spirit, remained untouched. Marco is now serving community service and will have to repay every cent he stole. As for me, I found the balance. My grandmother always sought to honor the past while embracing the future. On the night of the grand reopening, as I watched the restaurant filled with both new and long-time customers, I felt Grandma Sophia's presence. Her portrait, now restored, and placed above the original safe, seemed to smile at me. "Familia es familia," I could almost hear her say. But now I understood what she truly meant. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who honor your legacy and share your values. And the secret recipe? It's in the new safe, of course. But it's also in my heart, where it has always been. Because the true secret was never just a list of ingredients. It was the love that turned a small seaside restaurant into a home filled with precious memories. Familia es familia. I could almost hear her say. But now I understood what she truly meant. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who honor your legacy and share your values. And the secret recipe? It's in the new safe, of course. But it's also in my heart, where it has always been. Because the true secret was never just a list of ingredients. It was the love that turned a small seaside restaurant into a home filled with precious memories.